Welcome to the Ty Beal Show, where we discuss food, science, and life. I'm Ty Beal, a scientist at the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, or GAIN. My guest today is Marit Kolby, a nutritional biologist and food scientist, and author of the popular Norwegian book translated in English as What and When Should We Eat? Most people think ultra-processed foods are bad because they're high in calories and low in nutrients. But what if I told you that's just scratching the surface? Today we're going beyond the obvious to understand why your body treats a 200-calorie apple completely differently than 200 calories from an ultra-processed snack. A quick note before we start. This podcast is separate from my role at GAIN. All right, let's dive in. Hi, Marit. It's nice to see you.
Hi, Ty. It's really nice to see you too.
I'm really glad that you were able to join me. So you are kind of an expert on all things ultra-processed foods, which we'll get really into in this conversation. We'll dig into the details. But before that, I'd love to hear a little bit about what made you interested in that topic and sort of how you progressed to become such an expert in this area.
Well, so my educational background is in food science, and I studied quite a lot of microbiology and also food processing during my bachelor's, the bachelor's degree, and then I went on to do a master's in nutritional biology, and learn about a lot about how the body is controlled at the very molecular level. And then after that, I developed a very keen interest in the microbiome, and I really found the effects of the microbiome very intriguing, and I kept reading papers about that and seeking more knowledge and insights. But then also I suddenly this processing thing came into my radar, this ultra processing thing.
Yeah.
And I started looking into that as well. So I was sort of following these two tracks, like the gut microbiome and what was happening in research there. And I also followed this processing thing. And then at one point, I realized that these two are connected because these the factors that influence our biology through processing, they act through the microbiome to a large degree, at least. So then I started looking into the details of that, and the rest is history. So, in 2018, I published a paper with a peer and a friend of mine, where we lined out some of these biological mechanisms and showed how the industrial processing or the ultra processing of foods were linked to disruptions in gut homeostasis, really.
Wow. So that's fascinating. I think we'll learn probably everything people could want to know and more about ultra-processed foods in this conversation. But if we could start just with an overview of the definition, what are ultra-processed foods for those who don't know?
Oh, yeah, and there's there's a lot of debate about that definition. And the scientific definition is very, very long. Very complicated. That will take minutes to go through. I usually say that ultra-processed foods are industrial foods that are processed in such an extensive way that they have lost their health preserving or promoting potential. But you could use lots of different definitions. There was this paper that was published just a few days ago about the role of ultra-processed foods in obesity, and And in that paper, they introduced a new type of definition and described them as evolutionary novel industrial formulations manufactured by deconstructing foods into their component parts, such as oils, starches, and sweeteners, modifying them, for instance, through enzymatic processes, and recombining them with the cosmetic additives. And I think that's that's a good definition. It describes what they are really. And when we talk about ultra processed foods, but we should really talk about ultra processed products, because this is not just about foods; it's very much also about the drinks. I think the drinks are hugely important in this. So that would
You're
be
right, yeah.
all the sodas, all the sweetened drinks.
Yeah. And when you say ultra processed products, that's also something that's, I think, important, because when we think of food, we typically think of something that's more in its natural state. So these are very different from the state that they were sort of developed in, right? They've been extracted, refined, they've been processed to such a degree that they're unrecognizable from their original, whether that's a crop or an animal product, right? So I think what we think about, most people, when they hear ultra processed foods today, they may not know what it is, but certain things have been on the news, right? The colorings, the artificial colorings, for example. So some of these additives, I think those are a little bit more intuitive for people to understand. Oh, these Fruit Loops, they have these artificial dyes. That's bad, right? So can you tell us a little bit about these additives, from emulsifiers to different types of colorings and sweeteners, etc.?
Sure. So, and it's also important to know that not all additives make foods or drinks ultra processed. So there's additives that are added to preserve the quality of foods, like preservatives or antioxidants or these things. They don't make the foods ultra processed. They don't sort of shift them into that category. So it's these additives that we call cosmetic. So these are additives that we don't really need them. They are there to sort of make the foods or drinks look more attractive or feel more genuine or whatever. And also to compensate for using less whole foods in a product. So so that's why we call them cosmetic, and they will be like colors, like that you mentioned. They will be different types of emulsifiers or compounds that change the texture of the food. They can be fillers that sort of attract water and sort of compensate for taking out fat, for instance. And also it's the sweetness, it's the artificial sweetness, and it's also things that are maybe not so much on people's radars, like glazing agents that would make candy look shiny and nice and these things. But I think what's been researched most is probably the colors, the colorings, and the emulsifiers and the sweeteners. So it's interesting then to see that these unnecessary additives, so they're not necessary for creating nutritious and good foods. They're just necessary to increase profit, really.
Sure.
Yeah, so it's interesting to see that some of these also have very negative health effects. And I don't know if that's just a coincidence or if it's some sort of weird karma or something, but but anyway, that's been very well documented now and through many years of research. So some of them seem to be really problematic.
Okay, so there's some potential problems with these compounds that we'll get into, sort of maybe the mechanisms for what those are. I think we, on this show and on in the public in general, people talk a lot about this sort of overconsumption thing where it drives overconsumption. I think that's been talked about so much that what I'd really love to focus on is some of these areas that you're talking about that go much more beyond that. It's not just about making people consume more, because when you think about if someone was able to consume the same amount of calories. I think what your work has shown is that there actually are really potential negative effects, even if there's no overconsumption, right? And that's what we'll get into a little bit of that, those mechanisms. So maybe starting out, there's this idea about information. So food being sort of a communicator of information, not just fuel, not just sort of calories, not even just nutrients. So can you explain to us what that means? And how does the body read these sort of chemical signals from our food?
So it can act as information in more ways. It can be through the actual molecules in foods. For instance, when you extract the oils from seeds, some of these polyunsaturated fatty acids, they will act on nuclear receptors that reside inside our cell nucleus and affect our gene expression because of that. So it's actually when we eat like a whole seed, for instance, eat a sunflower seed, you will get like a tiny amount of specific types of fatty acids that are residing in that seed. And they will also, they will signal to your genetic machinery and instruct the cells about what to do. And these polyunsaturated fatty acids, they will typically affect things that would deal with the fatty acid metabolism. So, should the liver turn up its oxidation of fats? Should it turn up? Should the adipose tissue, should it turn up the storage of fats and things like that, So one thing is, and this is just like an hypothesis. It hasn't been that well researched, but what happens when you eat foods that are made up of these extracts? You will get a lot of these signals, right? And you will get them in proportions that you would typically not get from whole foods. So I think that's like that's an area that needs a lot more research. But I think we shouldn't rule out that can be that these things can have important effects. And also, of course, when we eat foods, they meet the microbes in the digestive system, and this starts already in the mouth and it goes on, in the stomach, in the small intestine, and the large intestine. But these microbes, they will munch on our food and they will break it down to new compounds. So the foods we eat, if you would analyze a meal and look for how many chemical compounds are in this meal, after the microbiome has been munching on it, it's going to be many times more, because they create a lot of metabolites that are specific to their activity. And some of these metabolites, they also function as information, and so that's another black box because we haven't really figured all of these effects out. But we know a few things. We know, for instance, that when we eat fiber-rich foods like whole fruits and vegetables and nuts and these things that contain fibers, the microbiota, they will break it down to short chain fatty acids, and they will signal both in the gut and also travel with the bloodstream and signal in the brain. So they will signal satiety in our brains. So that's actually a bacteria-derived molecule that helps us get full from a meal. So that's just a couple of examples of how foods are a lot of information, not just nutrients and energy.
Right.
I could go on and on, but that would, eat up all of our time for this podcast.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like what I'm hearing is these foods provide information in a sort of way that we've maybe evolved to, because we've been consuming foods in their natural state for a long time, right? And so only recently have we sort of shifted and extracted sort of very concentrated amounts of certain compounds within foods. We'll get into the structure, I think, next, but that process we know has a very different effect on the body. If you're going to consume a sunflower seed versus concentrated oil that's very different. And so I think what you're saying is we're learning a lot about it, but there are lots of explanations for why these can be potentially problematic. Just extracting something from a food doesn't necessarily mean that it's a problem, but what it does mean is that it's very different than the original source. And that's what we have to kind of look into. So when we talk about foods as a structure, there's often this term food matrix that maybe many people have heard. So the food, it's not just about, how many different molecules are in that food, but how is that put together and held together in the food itself? So, whether that's a whole food or a highly refined processed food. Can you walk us through what happens when the body breaks down a whole food, a minimally processed food into different components, and what the difference is when that's an ultra processed, highly refined food?
Yeah, sure. So what many people are probably not aware of the fact that when we eat foods, we're actually eating cells. Mostly cells. So we're eating plant cells and animal cells, and some foods are without a cell structure, like milk and honey, for instance. But even milk will have naturally like different structures in that liquid. But anyway, we're eating plant foods, and we're plant cells and animal cells. And what happens when we eat whole foods, that we will start crushing those cells in our mouth by chewing. So the chewing starts this process of breaking these cells down. But that will happen sort of gradually, and we will only break a little bit at a time. When we chew the foods and we swallow the foods, and they're digested by acids and enzymes and stuff in the stomach, and then this sort of continues along the whole length of the digestive system. But when we eat whole foods, these cells will sort of dissolve and release their nutrients in a gradual way that is sort of aligned with our ability to take up these nutrients.
Okay.
And also the animal cells, they're just covered by a very thin plasma membrane or a fatty acid membrane that our enzymes can totally dissolve. So we will sort of access all the nutrients in the animal cells, whereas the plant cells, they're contained in a very strong cell wall made up of celluloses, for instance, and that takes a lot more to break, and our digestive enzymes can't break that cell wall. So unless we are able to crush them in the chewing, or they get sort of dissolved in the stomach acid, some of these plant cells, they will travel undigested to the large intestine. So we're not able to access all the nutrients from plant cells, which is actually a good thing, because that provides nutrients for these commensal good bacteria in the colon. So now they will access these plant cells. They can hydrolyze this the cell wall and then access the nutrients. And that, the good thing about that is that it's gonna give a head start for these good bacteria in the colon. And so they will eat these plant cells, they will thrive on that, and then they will become they will grow and become sort of the most abundant, and they will keep pathogenic bacteria down by producing these. For instance, they will produce these short chain fatty acids. They will create an acidic environment, and of course also the gut has a lot of it sends out a lot of antimicrobial peptides and these things to keep the growth of pathogenic bacteria at bay. But anyway, that's the way we're supposed to interact with our foods. That's the way the digestive system is supposed to function. But if we eat foods that are made out of these extracts, we lose all of that interplay with the food structures. So we will, already in the mouth, it will be sort of overload of free nutrients that can very much shift this whole microbial picture. And the problem with that is both that the less beneficial bacteria is the ones that tend to thrive on these simple free sugars. So we will sort of give the less beneficial bacteria a head start in our digestive system, and that happens already from the mouth. And then this sort of propagates along the digestive system, and what's going on in the mouth it clearly affects what's going on in the rest of the digestive system. So we can throw sort of the balance off by eating all these acellular nutrients that we call them.
Okay.
So I hope that was not too technical.
No, that's great. That's what we want to know. I think many people, myself included, I kind of intuitively think, okay, the structure of a food, that matters. It's different than having this really refined, extracted product. I don't think I really get all of the mechanisms and the underlying biology. So it's really helpful to hear a little bit about that. Our body, it sounds like, has really evolved to know what to do with whole foods.
Yeah,
very
exactly.
much a synergistic thing. We get this food, our guts, our gut microbiome, the microbiome in our mouth, it all works together. It knows what to do. Now it sounds like we've recently been given a totally different thing that our body hasn't really been exposed to. And what you're saying is that's causing problems in a lot of different ways. The actual structure, the lack of structure, the microbiome. I think we went from food matrix, the structure of food. Now you're talking about the gut revolution, the microbiome. Can you talk a little bit more in depth now about what gut homeostasis looks like? You said certain compounds can feed the bad bacteria, whereas, and too much of them, right, gives them a head start.
Yeah.
There's something about balance in the gut. So what's really happening down there when we eat ultra-processed foods that's problematic?
So, yeah, there will be more than one problematic thing happening. And I think that our knowledge has evolved on this as well. So I think for a long time, we have been concerned with trying to make sense of the actual bacteria in the gut, trying to sort of, map them, who are they and what are they doing, and so on. And I think that focus has now shifted more towards what we call gut homeostasis, which is about more than just the bacteria or the microbes that live there and what they do. So what's important to know is that our digestive system, so the digestive system is really at the center of what's the problem with ultra-processed foods. In my understanding, there are other things as well, but it's really, really important. So what the digestive system is constantly trying to do is to maximize nutrients and to minimize negative effects of microbes, because we have microbes all through our digestive system, and we have even more in our mouth, in our colon than in our colon. So and to do that, the digestive system uses a lot of functions. I mentioned these antimicrobial peptides. They're secreted in the mouth. They're secreted in the small intestine and the large intestine. We have a lot of acid in our stomach, for instance, that will kill off a lot of bacteria, but not all of them. And we also have this system. I don't know if you're familiar with that, called oh my god! Now my brain just froze.
It must have been you had a little bit of ultra processed food that just hijacked your brain for a minute there.
So we have this system in our digestive system. We have this system for sort of cleaning out leftovers from food and bacteria from our small intestine, which is called the migrating motor complex. So that's a series of rhythmic muscle contractions that move these bacteria and the food leftovers from the small intestine and into the colon. So that's also a mechanism that keeps the small intestine clean, and then pushes it into the large intestine, which is constructed to handle all this bacterial growth. So this is where it's supposed to happen. So, and then the large intestine or the colon, it works like so that's like a big fermentation chamber for bacteria. So this is where the sort of extra where they help us extract nutrients, and they produce a lot of useful compounds for us. And now I sort of totally lost track of what was your question again. Yeah, it was a gut homeostasis thing. So so what
exactly.
what the whole digestive system is trying to do all the time is to keep sort of the bacterial growth, to make sure the right microbes grow at the right places at the right times, and that not pathogenic bacteria can take over areas of the digestive system that's supposed to be sort of where this bacterial growth is not supposed to happen. So and to do that, it's important for the digestive system to keep like the right sort of environment for that at the right time, and it also does that by restricting the access of oxygen, for instance. So so along the length of the digestive system, the system will become less. It will have less and less oxygen in it. And when we arrive at the large intestine, it will be a totally anaerobic environment. And if that anaerobic environment is disrupted in some way, that will facilitate the growth of these pathogenic bacteria. So it's not just about, how foods affect the bacteria. It's about how, is the gut able to maintain that right environment for maintaining health. So that's really that's a little bit of a shift in the understanding. So what we see is that some of these compounds in ultra processed foods, and probably the foods, like the combination of foods itself, will disrupt that gut homeostasis. For instance, by removing some of that protective layer of mucus in the gut that's been seen from some of these additives, for instance. So there's this protective layer of mucus that makes sure the bacteria don't really get into close contact with the gut cells. And if that mucus layer is disrupted, they will enter the gut cells. They will induce inflammation. Then oxygen will leak into the gut lumen, which will facilitate growth of pathogenic bacteria. So this is a little bit complicated, but this is how it seems to work. So we have to ask not just what kind of or how will these compounds change the bacteria in our gut. We need to ask the question, what maintains gut homeostasis in humans? And that will be whole foods and minimal processed foods, and not ultra processed foods, unfortunately.
All right. So there's been something that's happened here to these foods that really disrupt our gut balance.
Yes.
And it's important to maintain that. So it can get out of balance. And for one, it's hard to get it back into the right balance. But what you're saying is that maintaining this balance and this sort of healthy gut has so many different functions, from our physical health to mental health. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is there a connection here then from how this gut homeostasis affects our brain and our mental cognitive function?
Yeah, so the common denominator there will be inflammation. So what really happens is that it's not about eating one ultra-processed food product. It's about the ultra-processed diets. That's the problem.
That's the key.
Yeah, so we don't really know when this balance shifts, but we know that we can handle a few of these products. But at some point, if it dominates the diets, at least it's going to be too much, and that's going to create this evolutionary new environment in the gut that's going to fuel inflammation or trigger inflammatory signals, which will create gut inflammation. And inflammation does not stay in one place. It will spread throughout the body, and we will get this condition that we call a low grade, or like a chronic low grade inflammation. And a lot of that will be derived from the gut, but it will also happen as a cause of. It can happen as a cause of, for instance, too much sugars hitting the digestive system, being taken up into the circulation, and the blood sugar rising really rapidly. That will also cause inflammation in the circulatory system via the oxidative stress. But getting back to the gut, so the problem is that these foods or these ultra processed diets, they will create inflammation in the gut, and in a state of inflammation, the body really reprograms many of its functions. So that will it will reprogram a lot of these homeostatic systems that are there to keep us healthy. So we have systems for keeping blood glucose at the right level, to maintain the right levels of blood lipids, for instance, to maintain the right blood pressure, to maintain the right chemical signals in the brain, like you asked about, via the neurotransmitters and these things. And it's also the energy and metabolic rate, and it's about the weight and appetite regulations, and all of these systems, they will be thrown out of whack when inflammation increases. So that's why inflammation is so problematic. So they will, you can induce inflammation experimentally by injecting bacterial molecules into the circulation. So these will be the same type of molecules that you will actually grow in your digestive system if you eat a totally ultra processed dominated diet.
That's scary.
Yeah, it's a little bit scary, but it's also fascinating that you can isolate these bacterial molecules. You can inject them in small doses, and you will see disruption in the brain signaling functions, for instance. So that's probably that's at least, there are many explanations for why foods can affect our mental and cognitive state, but that's at least one of them. So inflammation is really key, and I think that's also, it should be interesting, and it could be motivating, because it's actually possible to measure your level of low grade inflammation. There's a marker called high sensitive CRP, or micro CRP, that can be measured, and if that's elevated, you can try different lifestyle changes and see if that improves. If it goes down, that will be a signal that you're actually doing something good for your body. So
I'm so curious. I'm really interested to know, if somebody feels good, is that sending some sort of message about their diet must be working for them? Or is it not always related? Can you feel great and you're not doing well? Can you feel bad, but your body's saying good? I'm trying to understand, because I think there are different people some people, ultra processed diets make them feel terrible. Other people, they may feel fine. Is there different biology going on there, or is it different people's perception of what's going on?
I don't know really. I think it might be a bit of both, but there's definitely a difference between people in the tolerance of these foods, and also, there will be individual differences in what kind of foods or products are you consuming, and there might be some combinations that are worse than others. For instance, it seems like there's a link between the diet sodas and depression, for instance. So maybe something is happening there that's especially bad for people who are somehow vulnerable to developing depression. We don't really know. We don't really know that this. I'm sure there are people who can have a diet that's made of mostly ultra processed foods and be fine, at least for a while. Uh, maybe not for the whole life. I don't know. And there are people who are much more sensitive to these types of foods and maybe the additives, and some of us are probably like the canaries in a coal mine. We're more sensitive to things that other people don't react to, and there can be many explanations for that. Some you probably know some people who can eat anything and be fine, and some people are very sensitive to food, so that that might be caused by different types of gut homeostasis, and how healthy is your digestive system. It could be genetic differences, and I don't know. And also we have a lot of other stressors in our lives that will sort of add or subtract from our energy, or the affect what we can handle of stresses. Then, so if if you're physically active, if you sleep well, if you don't have a lot of stress, and you have good social relations with people, maybe you will be able to tolerate more not so good foods than if all these things were not on track. I don't know really, but there are definitely individual differences for sure.
There's a lot of individual differences. What I've also noticed is when somebody changes their diet to something their body's not used to, that can often cause some challenges or some symptoms. I'm wondering, is there something about your body learning to handle what you're providing it? Is there something about if you go from one particular type of diet and you introduce new foods, that it could potentially cause some disruption to homeostasis, but your body can figure it out, or maybe it doesn't? But at least maybe in some people, their bodies are figuring out the new information that they're being given, and they're finding a way to deal with it. Because I think the body doesn't want to be unhealthy. I think it's trying to look for how can I be thriving here?
Yeah, so the body will always try to adapt to whatever is happening to it. And also, we're metabolically flexible, so we can change from one diet to another, and we can adapt to that. And we also know that if you look at different traditional diets that people have been eating, that we have researched, these diets are very, very different. So you will have some sort of diets, for instance, some Pacific islands, they will have a lot of carbohydrates in the diets, a lot of fruits, maybe roots and tubers and these things, and very little meat, very little fat in the diets. And then you have other traditional populations like the Maasai, for instance, that eat mostly meat and milk and blood, and thrive on a lot of fat, a lot of saturated fat, and we know that we can adapt to these different kinds of diets. So that's when these that information from the food will act on our genetic machinery and tell our cells to adapt sort of to these diets. And I think that could, if that transition happened very gradually, you wouldn't feel anything. But if you go from let's say you go from a plant-dominated diet and then you enter into a ketogenic diet, that's a huge difference. And if you do that from one day to another, there's reason to believe that can cause some some symptoms. And you probably heard about the keto flu.
Yeah,
And and
indeed.
that might be caused by that might even be caused by changes in the gut microbiome and what's going on there, and signals
Yeah,
that are transferred from the gut to the circulatory system. But
yeah.
I think if the transition happens gradually, we're probably able to adapt to almost any kind of at least whole food based diet.
Well, that's the key, because it sounds like there are populations that can thrive on, more plant-based, high carbohydrate, more animal-based. Yet we have not seen an example of a population thriving on high ultra-processed diets.
Yeah, that's
I mean, maybe the future holds some sort of technological solution to that, but we have not seen it happen, right?
No, it hasn't happened anywhere, and I doubt it's ever going to happen, because the problem is we not we're not we haven't evolved for these diets. We have evolved for whole foods based
Yeah.
diets. So we're gonna have to eat diets that match our biology. And I don't think that we can research our way out of that in some way, or develop some sort of technology that's gonna change our biology to handle these novel
That would be
foods.
very impressive if we did figure out a way out.
Yeah.
I think it's so complicated because these foods contain thousands of compounds, thousands of molecules, that we're barely just scratching the surface on understanding. And then also the food matrix. Can we take a food, completely refine it and extract ingredients and somehow put them together in a food matrix that is good for our biology? Who knows?
Yeah, and if we were to do all of that, why not just eat the whole foods?
That's a great question, Marit. Great question.
So
because of money.
Yeah,
because of
money, because someone
profits.
so that and I think it's important to keep in mind when we talk about these ultra processed foods or ultra processed products, that it's part of the actual definition that these foods are made with the purpose of increasing profit. So it's not for producing as nutritious and great foods as possible. It's for increasing profit. So so the purpose part is really important. And I just wanted to add what you said, that to what you said about we're scratching the surface about chemical compounds and how they work, in foods, and that's interesting. We really we haven't at all understood the chemical complexity of foods. So I think when we register or track nutrients in foods, that's making up less than 1% of the known chemical compounds that have biological effects in the food. So and we think that we have sort of found out what are the essential oh my god, the essential nutrients, but some now and then there's a nutrient being added to the list. A few years ago it was choline.
Right.
I think in the future we will add more of these nutrients to that list of essential nutrients, like for instance the DHA, the long chain omega-3 fatty acid, for instance, and there might be more of them as well that we will add to the list when we learn more about their biological functions.
So this is, I think we could talk forever about that. I think what this sort of metaphor I think of is, it's kind of like how much we've explored of the bottom of the ocean. Maybe 1%.
Yeah, exactly.
It's sort of like we know so little about so many of these things. I think we need to stay humble rather than thinking, oh, ultra processed foods are fine as long as you just don't eat too much or something, right? We don't really know what's going on. We really don't. I mean, we're just getting started. So I think there's so much evidence when you look at the public health sort of epidemiological evidence, linking from heart disease to diabetes to cancer to everything you can think about, depression. But one of the areas that you sort of talk about, one of the concepts is this idea of ultra processed foods creating a double hit, because what you're talking about is there's these protective compounds, structure, beneficial nutrients that we lose, and then we gain all of these processed chemicals, contaminants, potential inflammatory triggers. Can you explain how that sort of works together to create dysregulation, causes our body to not be able to handle as much of the bad stuff?
Yeah, so we talked about the structure of foods earlier, and the plant cells, for instance. But the plant cells, they don't, of course, they don't just contain nutrients. They also contain all these non-nutrient compounds that have biological effects. And people probably know them as antioxidants because they were, in the beginning, we figured out that they had antioxidant properties. But what's interesting, and we thought that, well, they're probably taken up into the bloodstream, and they're going to be antioxidants in the bloodstream, because somehow nutrition science seems to be a little bit obsessed with what's going on in the blood. In my opinion, we should be a lot more obsessed with what's going on in the gut. And I think it seems like these antioxidants are much more important in the gut than in the bloodstream. But they also act as information. So they will tiny amounts of these signals will be taken up in the bloodstream and sent especially to the liver, and signal to the liver to make more of these endogenous or self-made antioxidants. So most of the antioxidants in the body are the ones we make ourselves. So these are small compounds, or they are enzymes, and they're dependent on a lot of nutrients to make those, So we are to be able to have a functioning antioxidant system in the body, we have to take in a lot of and enough of nutrients from the foods. And we know that an ultra-processed diet does not offer as many nutrients as a whole food-based diet. So already there you have a problem. You're getting a lot of foods that trigger these oxidative processes, but you don't get the nutrients to be able to handle them. So that's one example of the double hit thing.
Can I just clarify here? You're saying that the body produces more antioxidants than we get from the foods we eat.
Yes.
Is that right?
The amount of antioxidants from the foods is tiny, and it doesn't really have an antioxidant effect in the bloodstream, except from the antioxidant vitamins, vitamin C and E. So the polyphenols and these things, the anthocyanins and these things that we have been told to seek from berries or fruits and vegetables or whatever, they don't really have a meaningful antioxidant effect in our bloodstream. But they act as signals to produce our own antioxidants.
Fascinating.
Yeah, so that antioxidant system, that's really something to look into, because it's it's complicated. It's a lot of compounds, and I'm not going to go through all of them now because that's going to be too time consuming. But it's very, very interesting.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can shift into these essential nutrients that you've mentioned. You said there's potentially more nutrients that could be added, but we already know, I think there's about 29 essential micronutrients. So these are vitamins and minerals. And you've said that the inflammation that ultra-processed foods can cause, and ultra-processed foods themselves can actually contribute to nutrient deficiencies. And I'm concerned about that because from the work that I've been involved in, we know that there are large nutrient deficiencies around the world. Even in wealthy countries in the US and the UK, for example, iron deficiency among women is about 20%. So 1 in 5 women is iron deficient. So that's pretty widespread. Can you tell us a little bit about how ultra processed foods and inflammation affects iron metabolism and any other nutrients that are affected by that?
Yeah, so I think this is really, really interesting, and I've been intrigued by that for a long time. Why is it that iron is, it's in every food almost. It's the most common element on the planet, and still we have iron deficiency in so many people. How is that even possible?
It's crazy.
Yeah. So, and what's really interesting about that is that, so we come back to the inflammation again, So, if the gut environment is in a state of this low grade sustained inflammation, that's also information to the body. So, what it's really signaling with this inflammation is that the body will think, I am under microbial attack. And many of these pathogenic bacteria, they are iron loving, so the body knows how to hide the iron away from the microbes. So it will, first of all, it will hide it from the circulation. So we will store it in the ferritin, so there will be less iron available, less free iron available in the blood, but it will also make sure that the gut doesn't take up as much iron. So it will sort of stop the transport from the gut into the bloodstream to make sure it doesn't feed the pathogenic bacteria. And this happens through hormonal regulation, and it happens as a result of the inflammation. So you could do the same thing like we talked about earlier. You could inject the bacterial molecule, increase the inflammation, and you could see that that will restrict the flow of iron from the digestive system into the circulation. So that's the correct response from the body to that signal that it's getting. But of course, that's a problem for the nutrient status. So what we need to do then is not just add more iron, because iron in the gut can also in itself trigger more inflammation. So what we need to do is to change the diet and to get the inflammation down, so that the gut will be able to take the iron up and transfer it into the circulation. So that's a little bit, that's sort of shifting the focus on how to deal with these problems.
Fascinating that the body, when it thinks it's under attack from maybe a pathogenic bacteria, when in fact it's this low-grade inflammation, the body is trying to protect itself.
Yes.
It's trying to hide that iron, you're saying, from the microbes that would feed off of it. And so it's sort of creating this cycle where the inflammation, this sort of issue of ultra-processed foods and consuming these foods that are disrupting our gut homeostasis and all of our sort of regular functions, are contributing to us not being able to absorb this essential nutrient that we need for all sorts of functions, which is a kind of ironic. Iron, that nutrient iron, is such a challenge. So I want to shift now into the packaging discussion, because a lot of ultra processed foods are packaged in plastic and other compounds that could be potentially problematic. And we know that there's a lot of microplastics in our bodies, in the environment. How do we think about packaging in terms of the ultra processed foods versus maybe a minimally processed food that is in packaging itself? Like, is there something really that the ultra processed foods are packaged in a way that's a bit worse or more problematic, or is this sort of an issue with all packaged foods?
I think this is not just this is not specific for ultra processed foods. So this will be, even if you made some sort of dish the best way, keeping the quality of the dish high, and then wrapped it in some sort of plastic container, that would leach chemicals like phthalates and bisphenols and stuff, and you would heat it in that plastic container and get loads of microplastics into the foods. That would still be problematic, even if the food was top quality. So that's not specific for ultra processed foods. And also, I am not aware of any research that has investigated if an ultra-processed food, an ultra-processed diet will actually deliver a lot more microplastics into the body than a less processed diet. I would assume it does, because you would typically have a lot more packaged food, and you would typically have more foods that you would heat in plastics, maybe. And I just want to say that we need to stop that right away. We need to stop heating food in plastic. And I wish we could just write it on the sky, because people are still doing it, and we know that it releases so much plastic into the food. Well, but anyway, so we don't really
Can I just ask a little bit more about that? So the heating of the plastic, what I'm hearing is in the when the food is in there. So let's say you have a plastic Tupperware and people heat that up in the microwave. You're saying that's releasing a lot of these microplastics and chemicals that are problematic. I'm curious to know, is it just about heating the plastic with the food in it, or is it also when you're washing the dishes? So like you have Tupperware, so you have plastic Tupperware and you put them into the dishwasher, and those are heated at a high temperature. If those are then cooled and then used to store food and not heated up, is that less problematic than heating the plastic with the food in the container?
So I don't know really all of these details about the release of microplastics and different kinds of containers and stuff. But in general, if you put cold foods in cold containers and don't heat it in the containers, I would say plastics are okay. Glass is probably better, but it's not a problem. It's the heating that's the problem.
It's the heating with the food in there.
Yeah, it's the heating. And it's also, using plastic cutting boards, for instance. We need to stop that as well and go back to the wooden ones. So if you do that, if you change your cutting boards and stop heating food in plastic, you have done quite a lot to to avoid some microplastics. And also, of course, do not boil in bag rice and these things, but that's also heating in plastic, of course. So I think so microplastics, that's one. I think it's going to be huge, and we know. I think we already know enough to issue a huge warning about microplastics. We find them in every organ that's been investigated, and they cause oxidative stress and inflammation. So they're totally adding to that huge stress that our bodies are being exposed to in our modern environment. But it's also, you asked about other kinds of compounds or chemicals in the packaging. And they seem to play a role too, and there have been some studies looking into that, and they find they can't really trace it back to the ultra processed foods, but they will find more of these chemicals in people who eat the most ultra processed foods. They will have more of these bisphenols, for instance, or phthalates, or these typically plastic derived chemicals. So that's another thing, the list goes on, and some of these things are not like we just talked about. They're not specific for ultra processed foods, but they tend to be more present in the ultra processed foods. So if you have like an ultra processed dominated diet, you will have more of these compounds than if you keep like a whole food based diet and cook from scratch from whole foods.
Well, I'm thinking about these ready-made meals, and if these are, processed with machinery, and they're cooked and heated, and if they're put, I don't know if they're put heated into the plastic container.
I think they often are.
That itself, so that's often ultra-processed, right? Yeah. There's not as many of the, minimally processed foods that do that.
And we often we don't really know these things, because we don't have any information on the packaging about how was this made? Was it, like you said, was it put heated into the plastic, or was it cool first? We don't really know, but it makes a difference for sure.
So if a food is produced on machinery that has potentially plastic, it's cooked and heated, it's potentially put into a plastic container. The plastic has been leaching into that. It's given to the store. The consumer purchases it, they bring it home, put it in the freezer, they heat it up for several minutes in the microwave, they eat it right then. They're getting a lot of plastic exposure from that food. So what are some of the consequences of this? Your hormones are disrupted. What does that do? What are some examples that to help us understand?
Yeah, so it depends on which hormones, which organ systems you will have problems in any kind of organ system, really. So for these chemical compounds that are environmental pollutants, for instance, they have what we at least know that they will affect like developmental processes, for instance, during pregnancy. They can affect fertility, for instance. So that's of course, and they also, they will also affect cognitive development during pregnancy, which also nutrients can do, like right? So there can be potentially many different kind of hits that will affect these processes. But when it comes to foods and nutrients and these things, for instance, I mentioned a high sugar diet that can influence hormonal regulations. That would be about the glucose regulation or the blood glucose regulation, and throw that off, which means that you can have a sustained elevated blood sugar that will cause a lot of problem especially in the circulatory system, but also inside the cells and tissues.
Right. So, okay. So to sort of wrap up the plastic packaging problem, the main thing I'm hearing is that, excess consumption, when you're having a diet really full of ultra processed foods, that's where you're going to run into trouble. We're exposed to plastics from a lot of different things in the environment. So it's sort of a cumulative load. How much are we getting, right? We want to minimize that. And one of the best ways to do that is just not heating food in plastic, right? So if you have cold food that you're having in the fridge, or you're putting into a plastic Tupperware that's not being heated, that's not a huge problem, but it's really the heating of that plastic. So we've talked a bit about all these different mechanisms, and I want to understand your perspective now about how do ultra-processed foods override our natural satiety signals. This is one of the probably largest or most important pathways for why ultra-processed foods are a problem. Can you tell us a little bit about your perspective in that area?
So we know that these foods are sort of engineered to override our natural signals of satiety, but they're also engineered to make us like them so much that it's almost impossible to stop. So that's one part of it, because they probably they release so many of these hormones like dopamine and other types of reward, activate these reward systems, that we want to eat them, and we want to continue eating them. So that's a problem, like in that actual meal. But if the body was functioning like it's supposed to do, we would regulate that. If we had like a huge a very high intake of energy in one meal, we should regulate that for the next meal, but we don't seem to do that. And I think that's probably that's when we get back to that inflammation again, because that's the inflammation also affects both appetite regulation and weight regulation on the longer term. So inflammation seems to blunt the response from, and that's supposed to come from the digestive system from eating foods. So we're supposed to be sort of told in inverted commas by our digestive system that now you've had enough. So we have sort of sensors that can sense now you had enough energy, you had enough nutrients, you had enough, and we're especially sensitive to protein, so we know we react to that, but we also react to other compounds, and like I mentioned, these metabolites from fiber, for instance, that signal satiety. So and that's like a whole That's like a lot of compounds that work together and signal via the both the circulatory system, but also the nervous system via the vagus nerve to the brain, and then signals to the these small populations of neurons in the brain that will decide if we are hungry or full. Yeah, so that doesn't seem to work as well. And well, if you induce inflammation, these systems will be blunted. But also the weight regulation, and that's probably it's the hormone leptin that's probably most important. That's supposed to signal when we have a good energy status. It's supposed to make us less hungry, more active, and so on. And it seems like, at least in animals, you can inject these bacterial molecules, induce inflammation, and these animals will develop leptin resistance.
Right.
So that so it's like the signal doesn't get across. The tissues that are supposed to receive these signals will not receive the signals that of the energy status of the body. So the body will sort of ask for more food, even though the energy status is good.
Yeah. And I also know a recent study in last year, 2024 in Japan, that was a randomized controlled trial, really showed that one of the drivers of this overconsumption was from the food texture and the eating rate. I think there was something like twice as many chews in an ultra processed food diet compared to the minimally processed one. So people half as many, should I say? So you're consuming these foods much quicker, and so you are sort of getting all of this sort of energy very quickly, and your body isn't sort of used to that.
That's right. But also, if we have like huge meals of whole foods, we will regulate that afterwards. We will eat less afterwards. So we have to think about both the short-term and the long-term regulation of appetite. So
you'll feel full longer if you're having a whole food meal. That's right. So how about these chemicals we've talked a lot about in the packaging and others, but when the food is processed itself, so when you're applying very high heat or pressure chemical treatments to create these ultra processed foods, what happens to the compounds in these foods?
So there will be some new compounds being made from that extensive heat. And again, this is not specific for ultra-processed foods. That will happen if you cremate your meat in your barbecue at home. At least some of that. But the ultra-processed foods, they tend to be heat treated to a larger extent than what you would typically do in your own kitchen. So you will have more of these process-derived compounds. So that could be acrylamide, for instance, which is formed by adding a lot of heat. It could be these advanced glycation end products that they're called, and we tolerate some of that, and they even some of them we enjoy and like. That's it's a browning of bread, for instance, and
the taste.
So it's like the caramel compounds that make baked foods taste good, and we have a system for handling these things, and we can tolerate some of that, but the ultra processed foods tend to contain a lot more. So maybe there might be an overload from these heat derived molecules in these foods. So it just adds to the list. That's not an explanation in itself, but when we add all these different factors, it makes quite a long list after a while.
Yeah, it adds up, and what's sort of sad to hear is that these high temperature treatments that make food really tasty are not the best for us if we have too much of them. So the acrylamide or acrylamide that comes from starches, right? So maybe French fries or chips, where they have that delicious sort of crispiness to them, that there could be too much of that chemical that overrides our detoxification system. These other compounds you've mentioned, these advanced glycation end products, so things like, heterocyclic amines or polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. These are HCAs and PHAs. Those are complex terms, but they're often from heating meat at high temperatures too. So this is sort of, there are plant foods that can have this problem. There are animal products that can have this problem. It's really an issue with excess heat treatment. And I think, when I look at the research in this, cooking things in ways that produce less of those products is generally healthier. Now, doesn't mean if you do it a little bit, that's a problem, but it's really about moderating how much of these really high heat cooked things. So barbecuing, burning, if you're sauteing or if you're frying and you completely, brown everything, it's not the best for health. And these ultra processed foods, what you're saying is on average, they're treated to a much greater degree. And that's going to create excess amounts of these harmful compounds.
Yeah, so there are, well, if you look at many of these ready-made meals, ultra-processed meals, a lot of them are deep fried in some or another way, and maybe twice, and you wouldn't know that from reading the label.
Yeah, they're not steamed typically.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the science and maybe a little bit confusing or complicated for people, and a little bit overwhelming to think about. Gosh, like all these foods are what I'm eating right now, right? If you're living in the U.S. or another European country or many countries that have a modern food system, a majority of the foods out there are ultra processed. So what can people do practically if you're listening to this and you realize that, oh gosh, that's my diet, those are the foods that I'm eating, right? What can we do to start making changes tomorrow? And I think it would help if you can give a little bit of some practical tips for helping people make that transition.
Yeah. So, the good news is it doesn't really have to be that difficult. So I think we just need to navigate the food system in a different way. We need to be once we have gained this new knowledge, we actually have the ability to make better food choices, which is a good thing, for us. So what we need to look for is what used to be foods before ultra processed foods took over our food system. And that would be foods the way you find them in nature. You don't have to grow them yourself. You don't have to get a cow. You just have to look for what used to be foods 2 generations ago. It doesn't really have to be much more difficult than that. So let's take a few examples. If you look for cereals, so instead of buying these cereal boxes with ultra processed cereals that are actually quite expensive, for what you get back in actual food and nutrients, look for rolled oats instead of Cheerios. If you're looking for oats, buy oats, and they're much cheaper, and they will be much more filling, and you can eat them with some yogurt or some milk and banana, for instance, and then you will have a minimally processed breakfast. And it doesn't take any cooking. It doesn't take any more time. It just takes a little bit of change of mindset, really.
Yeah.
And when it comes to lunches, for instance, if you're gonna cook a lunch, why not make an omelette instead of heating something ready-made? If you have access to a kitchen, it's really, really easy. It only takes a few minutes. You can make that into a filling, nourishing meal very easily. Just add some vegetables like a tomato and some cucumber, and it doesn't have to be more complicated than that. Also, I think one good tip is make bigger portions when you cook for dinner. You cook like good traditional foods made on from whole foods. Then make bigger portions and eat that for lunch. Heat them up in a non-plastic container for lunch.
Right. Glass.
And also, instead of buying French fries, buy potatoes and make potato wedges in the oven. It doesn't really take a lot of time. It's super, super easy. You can bake fish fillets in the oven instead of buying fish fingers. And there are loads of opportunities to make really easy, healthy, nutritious dishes from vegetables and meat, for instance. If you start looking for these kind of recipes, and it doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to choose recipes with umpteen ingredients and just a few good whole foods and combine them with some salt and pepper, and it goes a long way. And also, I think just being conscious about what's going on between meals. That's important as well, because we have developed this culture where we are more or less continuously eating. So we have to. It's important to think about what these ultra processed products do to our meal habits or eating habits as well, because they make it so easy to just to drink something and eat something outside of meals, which will also sabotage these systems in our digestive system to keep us healthy. So we need breaks from the foods as well, and that's important. So just being conscious about that, and maybe not buying that iced coffee, or not buying that low-fat yogurt to eat on in between meals, or just make sure that you eat good, nutritious and filling meals and eat to satiety. And I think that's also a problem. We've been told not to eat until we're full, and I think that's a big mistake as well, because we need those shifts in hormones. We need to shift from a state where we are feeling hunger from that hunger hormone that's called ghrelin, that's released from our stomachs when we're hungry. We need that change to happen. So that switch from ghrelin dominating, and then these satiety hormones from our gut or from our digestive system that are supposed to signal in our brains after a meal. And to achieve that, we need to eat enough to get full. So enough and nutritious food, that's very important. And that also makes it a lot easier to not snack in between meals, which also frees up both time and money, to buy good, proper foods for the actual meals.
Yeah, the key there is that you need to eat a nourishing meal, typically with more whole foods, to really be able to eat till you feel full and have your body actually feel full, right? Because if you do that with a highly ultra processed meal, the problem is that if you eat till you're full, you're going to probably eat too much, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So then you will have too much energy and too little nutrients, and the wrong information from the food.
Mm-hmm. Well, you make it sound simple, and that's really important, because I think it's overwhelming for people to think about how to switch their whole lifestyle in terms of how they eat. And it can be simple. You don't need to add a lot of ingredients. I'm hearing you say you can just use the foods themselves, add a little bit of seasoning, maybe a little salt and pepper, and that can go a long way. You can cut sweet potatoes in half, put a little bit of salt and just a little bit of oil or something on them, and bake them in the oven, and that's pretty tasty right there. So you've shared a lot with us, and I really appreciate that, because some of these topics are challenging, or they're difficult to understand. You've helped us understand about the mechanisms behind why ultra processed foods can be problematic, not just about making us eat more, but really these different mechanisms through disrupting our gut homeostasis and other things. You've also written a book that's called "What and When Should We Eat?" which is very successful in Norway. And I'd just love for you to tell us a little bit about that. What is the main message in that book?
Yeah, so it's the title really gives it away. What and when should we eat? So it's about what to eat, and that's to cut through that. It's about going back to the whole foods and avoiding the ultra processed foods. And I explain in the book why we have to do that. We actually have to do that because we're not able to stay healthy on these ultra processed diets. But I'm also explaining all the benefits of eating a whole food based diet. And also what's interesting is to me is that I've had lots of feedback after that book. And one of the things that I wasn't that much aware of was how much this actually increases the joy of eating for people, to go back to eating proper foods and allowing themselves to eat to satiety with a few meals. So that's one thing to go back to the mostly whole and minimally processed foods, but also the when to eat. So the main message there is it's not about starving ourselves or anything like that, but allowing enough time off food to make these important biological processes happen that happen when we don't eat. Because in the states where, for instance, when we sleep, there's a metabolic shift happening. So the body goes from running mostly on energy coming from the outside, from the foods, and switching to releasing stored energy. So that would be carbohydrates stored in the liver, and it will be fatty acids stored in the adipose tissue. And in that state, there's also, this is caused by a hormonal shift. So insulin will drop and glucagon will rise. And that's also a signal to start a lot of these maintenance processes that happens in the body. And that happens in almost every cell, but it's especially important in the digestive system, because that digestive system gets a lot of, there's a lot of chemical processes happening in the digestive system. You will have the food itself causes mechanical damage. You will have the acid from the stomach. You will have enzymes coming into the system. You will have the bile and all of that, and also some bacterial growth, and all of that together really takes a toll on the gut cells. So they need to repair and renew, and they do that during the night especially. So we need to allow that to happen. And that also, these maintenance processes also happen between meals. So we need to allow for breaks from foods. That's just as important as eating proper foods when we eat. And I think that message has been, it's the food industry that want to sell us lots of small in between meals. They're completely overriding that message. So so we need to take back the breaks from foods as well, and also allow ourselves to be hungry before we eat, because that's actually a good thing, and it increases the joy of eating.
Yeah. Well, we need to have nourishing whole foods to be able to eat till we're full and not want a snack. I think if people just try to take their ultra processed diet and you have a small portion, you're going to get hungry shortly afterwards, and it's not going to be sustainable. So it's really about shifting what we eat, like you said, and then that'll help us shift when we eat, giving ourselves breaks between meals. We don't need to eat every hour.
Absolutely.
And then overnight, Yeah, the body does all these processing, repair processes that are super important for us.
Absolutely. So it's and that's also one feedback I get a lot, that this was surprisingly easy, and also when people change both what they eat and when they eat, all these aches and pains they go away, and bothersome extra weight goes away, the headaches go away.
Wow.
The energy levels increase, they sleep better, they feel better, and there are loads of positive changes happening just from doing a few changes that people think are really easy to do, actually. So that's I'm an optimist. I think
Me too.
I think we can change the food system. We just need to get that information across, and we need to get maybe we just need to talk louder than the food industry somehow.
Yeah, with a megaphone. Well, I think it would help if we could get your book published in English so that more people in the US could read that and have access to it. So let's hope that can happen soon. I really enjoyed our conversation, Marit, and I'm so thankful that you were able to share your insights. I think the listeners will really get a lot out of this. So thank you for joining me today.
I hope so, and it was my pleasure. So thanks for inviting me.